They say Trump's hatred for Zelensky has a long history. The Ukrainian once refused to gather dirt on Biden for the American president. Then he reported the attempts to gather such dirt to Biden's allies. This allowed the Democrats in Congress to initiate impeachment. Trump wasn't removed from office, but it was quite a nerve-wracking experience. A lot has happened since then. Notably, Zelensky participated in Biden's campaign, visiting a weapons factory in Pennsylvania and praising the then president. In short, by now, Trump's hatred has stood the test of time, hardened, and become as strong as steel. One can imagine the pleasure with which the American called Zelensky a clown.
The moderately successful comedian President Zelensky convinced the U.S. to spend $350 billion on a war that can't be won, shouldn't have started, and wouldn't have started if I were president. He refuses to hold elections. As for ratings, how can there be popularity when your land and cities are being leveled? The only thing he managed was to play Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections. Zelensky must act quickly or he'll lose the country.
Given the U.S.'s role in the Ukrainian conflict, Trump expected Zelensky to be sincerely ready to serve and comply. However, it seems the Western media's praise went to the Ukrainian's head, and he began to see himself as the leader of a great European liberation campaign to the east. Zelensky clearly didn't understand what American political wrestling is like, where hitting with hands, feet, and below the belt is allowed, where anything goes, and the end justifies the means.
But here we have a situation where there are no elections in Ukraine. They have, you see, a state of emergency. In Ukraine, the leader, I hate to say it, has a support rating of less than 4%. How else, when explosions are heard in your country, cities fall into decay and ruined houses are everywhere? It looks like everything there is being demolished.
This statement doesn't mean the rating is really 4%. Trump just hinted. Americans themselves will decide Zelensky's popularity. And if they think so, it will be exactly 4% and not 1,000th more. And here in Kiev, they chose the most reckless and hopeless response option.
When we talk about 4%, and I've heard this nonsense, we understand this disinformation comes from Russia. We have evidence of this. Such figures were mentioned during negotiations between America and Russia. Unfortunately, President Trump, with all due respect, lives in a bubble of disinformation.
Zelensky was immediately told it would be better to refrain from rudeness. The Ukrainian was reprimanded by the U.S. Vice President and Trump's advisors. He was clearly told he became a legitimate target for everyone, and a reward for his head was announced in the form of the American president's favor. Musk emerged with an explanation about the 4% issue. He published a slew of tweets. In one, he stated that Zelensky's ratings are drawn by dependent sociologists funded by USAID. Then he said the 4% figure comes from American intelligence working in Ukraine. Finally, Musk concluded. Zelensky's people don't love him. Quite the opposite, they despise him. That's why elections aren't held in Ukraine. In general, the American official narrative can be considered fully formed. Oh yes, one more emphasis was added at the end. Now there's only one step left to accuse Zelensky of substance abuse, and there's no doubt that step will be taken.
Scott Bessent went there, but he was treated extremely rudely. He was told no in a provocative manner. Zelensky was asleep and didn't meet with him. Bessent traveled many hours to Kiev by train. It was a dangerous trip. The finance minister went to sign documents but returned empty-handed. Nothing was signed, although they promised Europe to return the money since everything is arranged as a loan, and we demand loan documentation. And it's all due to the incompetent past administration.
Despite the harsh attacks on Zelensky, the Americans haven't really gone after him yet. However, the supply of American weapons to Ukraine has started to be blocked. But there's a more effective tool. Musk reminded Kiev several times that his Starlink provides communication connectivity to Ukrainian troops. Just disconnect the satellite internet, and the Ukrainian armed forces will turn into disjointed, leaderless armed groups. Moreover, these groups, as it became clear, could lose European support at any moment. 2 summits were held this week, where first Big Europe, represented by France, Britain, Germany, and then Small Europe, consisting of the Baltics and other Czechs. They established that they can't particularly help Kiev. Well, maybe they'll send 30,000 peacekeepers, but only if Trump allows it. The summit results were summarized vaguely.
Ukrainians decide when and under what conditions to negotiate. Only they can agree to cease hostilities. We will support them until they make such a decision.
The logic of this statement is interesting. So Europe follows the will of the Ukrainians, and that will is expressed by Volodymyr Zelensky. However, Ukrainians should have expressed their will in presidential elections, but Zelensky hasn't scheduled those elections. In other words, the European position can transform at any moment into this. Zelensky expresses Zelensky's will, and the war is waged according to his desire, as what Ukrainians want is a mystery. Agree, in Europe it's enough to acknowledge a 4% rating, and then Kiev will have to find a new owner for the Hetman's regalia. By all indications, the hunt for the KVN mocker is serious. And there's suspicion that Zelensky will have to leave in the coming weeks. Oleg Romanov on the main broadcast.